Alrighty, hey traders, John Howell here. Thought I'd do a bit of a video for you guys as I'm getting a bit of a vitamin D. And the purpose of today's video, guys, is I want to open up more about me and about like who am I? Like what's my story behind the scenes of how I got involved with trading and what's my upbringing. I know a lot of you guys have been following me for quite some time, and so I thought I'd open up a bit more about me personally. And how I eventually got involved with trading. When I grew up, I always found it hard. At school. I was always pretty good at sports. So like cricket, and I used to play rugby league. So I was always good at sports. But when it comes down to just the school and stuff like that, I found it really hard. So as going through school, my dad used to own a landscape gardening business, and so therefore on the weekends I used to go work for my dad as a landscape gardener. Now the landscape gardener, what it really was is there was so many. What I did basically is there was many times where he'll go to a job site, right, for a house. And instead of hiring out a bobcat, like, there might be like 500 meters of old grass that we have to like dig out and, make it all flat. And, therefore then we can do the gardens and the sprinkler systems and the mulch and the grasses. And if there's going to be retaining walls and all that sort of stuff. So what he'd do for me is like, he'd plonk me on the site, started the day, he'd give me a wheelbarrow, he'd give me a shovel, give me a hoe. And I used to have to dig out hundreds and hundreds of meters of lawn by hand. The hoe? For you guys know what I'm talking about? you young guys, like, what's a hoe? It's like, no, not that derogatory term. It's a hoe. It's a manual. It's a tool where you dig out all grass. And then what I used to do is I used to then just say that was at the backyard of a house. He used to drop me off at like 6 o'clock in the morning and pick me up at 6 o'clock at night, depending on if it's later in the year here. The sun doesn't go down to 8 o'clock, so sometimes he's picking me up at 7 o'clock at night. Anyway, and what would happen was I would obviously have to dig out all the old lawn by hand, rake it up into piles, shovel it into a wheelbarrow, take it down to the front medium strip, tip it in the front medium strip, and do that whole lot. Then when my dad came, him and I and maybe some other offsiders at the time, we would then shovel all that onto his truck, all the old grass that was on the medium strip, onto the truck. And then we used to go to one of his old lands, or one of his lands that he had, and then be at night time with the floodlights on, shoveling it off the truck onto his land. And then we'd go to the farm if we had to pick up some grass, depending on what it was. And so that's what I did on the weekends. I grew up as that, just to earn some money. And that was hard jagger, man. That was really hard jagger. So that was as growing up. And for me, when I got to year 10, I couldn't wait to finish school. I hated school so much. Probably because I wasn't good at it, and I was always dumb. I was always fat as well too. And so like I couldn't wait to leave school. I'm like, can't wait to leave school. So finish year 10, and I'm off. Started working for my dad as, doing that sort of stuff. And I worked for him for a number of years. But what ended up happening with my dad back in the 80s, so that was my childhood upbringing, but what actually happened to my dad in the 80s was there was a thing called home fund where the interest rates went up to about 17%, and he bought a house, but he ended up losing the house. Now, my background is I come from a family of 7 kids and mum and dad, so a family of 9. 5 brothers, 2 sisters, and a family 9. So what ended up happening is when my dad ended up losing his house because the interest rates went to 17%, what ended up happening is that the only way he could get ahead with 7 kids, right, was we had to go to a government assisted house. Now, the only government assisted house, I forget exactly what they're called now, those different types of houses. You guys might know what I'm talking about. But those houses, you're in the middle of people doing drugs and screaming and fighting and all that sort of stuff. And so, housing commission, that's it. Housing commission, it's called housing commission. So we went to a housing commission house with a 3-bedroom housing commission house. All the 5 brothers in 1 bedroom, the 2 sisters in another bedroom, and mum and dad in the other bedroom. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine a house of 9 people? Man, there was a lot of fights there. There was a lot of fights. Maybe that's why I'm in the boxing now. If you guys don't know, I'm in the boxing, and I'm starting to train right now when it comes to my training. I've got another fight coming up soon. But anyway, so on the back of all that, let me do this here. So on the back of all that, what ended up happening was, that's where we grew up from. Now, I was working for my father at this time when we moved to the housing commission house and the government assisted house. But what ended up happening was my dad started working really hard because he wanted to get back on top of his feet again. And so he was working really hard and saving money. But he wasn't really keeping an eye on the books itself. And what ended up happening was, cut a long story short, that's where my mum used to grow up. I didn't realize my mum used to be into drugs when she was younger. And this is the location where she grew up from, where we actually ended up moving to. So within a few years of us moving there, my mum, who would be home all day, started to get involved with people next door to us who were doing drugs. And so she ended up and back in those days, a lot of checks. So she started forging checks to go to the bank and get cash out and all that sort of stuff. My dad wasn't really keeping an eye on the actual bank account because there wasn't any digital thing there to actually look at the bank. You know what I mean? Like back then, there was no mobile phones. It was like, what's going on with my internet today? It's like, you actually had to go into the bank, or you get a bank, like statement, right? So, but what ended up happening is my mum was forging all these checks to steal money from. I think my dad saved like 50 grand or something like that because he really wanted to help us get ahead. I mean, he actually wanted to get ahead. And so, cut a long story short, my mum stole everything from my dad. She wasn't paying the bills. She wasn't actually paying the rent. And the government ended up getting involved with it and split our family up. Half our brothers and sisters went to my mum's mum and dad, and the other half went to my dad's mum and dad, so our grandparents'. My mum actually ended up going to rehab, and my dad ended up living by himself for a few years. And so we lived at our grandparents', which, by the way, I loved, because the home cooked meals from my nan, oh my goodness, baked dinners. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? The baked dinners you had to, because back, family had 7 kids. Mum was just like big pot of spaghetti. You know what I mean? It was very early. It was like baked dinner. But Mum, the nan, she loves cooking, right? She would have the slow cooker on, and she'd have the chicken on, and maybe the meat, and the baked veggies, and the gravy. It's like, oh, I loved it. So I didn't quite mind. I got a good feed every night. Anyway, so after a few years, my mum ended up getting better. My mum and dad ended up getting back together again, and we ended up getting back together as a family. And then we moved to a much more nice location, and then we started to pick back up from there. And what ended up happening was, there was a time there where, sort of a long story short there, but working for my father, I used to go to church a lot. So I used to go to church, Bible studies, youth groups, and actual church every week, so 3 times a week. And so did my brothers and sisters. But then somehow my dad didn't like one of the youth ministers there. He thought he's brainwashed us, so he pulled all my brothers and sisters out. And I didn't want to leave because Kenny, who was actually the youth leader at the time, he was like a second, a brother to me, whatever. He was actually really good to me. And so anyway, cut a long story short, me and my dad ended up having a big falling out, and I was out in the streets. I had no job with him. Again, I can go into a lot more story, but I won't in this video. But I end up living on the streets there for a bit, or actually living in my car for a bit. And then Kenny actually came to the rescue and said, I know a place, a shared accommodation place. You can stay there for 2 weeks free, but then after that, you got to start paying rent. That's going to give you a chance to find a place, be able to eat, and then be able to actually go find a job. And the very first job I got, which was within a week, is I actually started going to a factory at 3 o'clock in the morning to stack toilet paper on pallets to go out to different outlets. I remember it very, very clearly. It was like this massive 7-bedroom house with all these people living in it. And then from there, I started doing all these different jobs, from the lollipop man to, you know, there's massive freeways being built, and I was the person planting thousands of plants on the sidelines, and I got into car detailing there for a while, and you know, I did so many of these different laboring jobs and all this sort of stuff. And I remember there was a time there where remember at this time I didn't know anything about business. I didn't know about like the financial markets and stock market and charts. Like, again, nothing like that, right? What was my upbringing? Like a hoe, wheelbarrow, shovel, rakes, you know, different types of lawns and so on and so forth. And you know, rockeries back at those days, there was a lot of rockeries. If you guys know what I'm talking about, there's a lot of where you have the rocks and you put the cement between them. That's how you actually make the garden, and mulch and so on and so forth, right? So that was my upbringing. I didn't know anything about anything when it comes to business, stock market stuff, trading, or even property for that matter. I just knew laboring, right? That was my job. My whole thing was laboring. And then suddenly what ended up happening was, I cut a long story short, it was just over 20 years ago that I was with my girlfriend, who then became my wife and then gave me my three beautiful children right now, which I love them so dearly. And at the time, I was only earning about $400 a week washing cars. I remember very, very clearly. I couldn't afford anything. I had this 1-bedroom rundown apartment. I had this big butt, like $50 big butt TV. Yeah, I had this like really rundown old leather sort of pink lounge as well too. And it was horrible. Like, looking back now, it's horrible. But that's all I could afford, right? And I ended up having to walk to the train station every day, catch a train, and then go wash cars for Holden, by the way. I'm not sure if you guys have Holden overseas, but Holden was the car dealer I was actually used to go. I used to work at. Anyway, so that's what I was working there for a while. And I remember very, very, very clearly that my girlfriend at the time, she actually looked out, make money from home or make money online and all that sort of stuff. This is when the internet obviously was quite big. I started getting online. So she found this DVD that was for 3 hours, and it was free DVD. Free DVD teaches you about business and property and stock market and blah, blah, blah. And so she got the DVD and it went for 3 hours. And she only got halfway through and she turned off. She goes, this guy talks about himself too much. All he talks about is just himself there. And I said, okay, give it to me. And I watched it. And I watched this thing like, man, it must have been at least 10 times. And the reason why he was talking about himself was because he was trying to share, like, listen, I was a guy that grew up on a farm. And then here I am, multi-millionaire, blah, blah, blah. And so he started talking a lot of things about a lot of things, right? And he kept it really simple about business, property, and also stock market. And he gave some really simple strategies around that. And what ended up happening was I was hooked. And he was selling a program for $2,000, but I couldn't afford the $2,000. So I went to the bank, got a $500 credit card, and they did is if you did a $500 deposit, you could then pay $200 a month off every single month for it. And then when I got that, that was the first introduction to stock market, charts. I then ended up buying another course from there, which taught more about options. And then I started learning about the actual charts itself, like support, resistance, and trend lines, and so on and so forth, and all that from there. You know, and then I went down this massive rabbit hole from there, like I'm pretty sure you guys have and do, of just learning so much about the markets, right? About stochastics and MACDs and RSIs and swing trading and day trading and scalping and all these different methods, you know. And so, or if you go to John's, if you want to actually learn my strategy that I use this day, go to John's free training, JOHNS freetraining.com. That's a webinar that I'm running right now of training. You'll be able to, on that webinar, I'll teach you. So John's freetraining.com. But so, yeah, and then so I went through so many ups and downs. When I first put it this way, when I first started trading, I borrowed money because I thought I was the king, and I ended up finding myself $250,000 in debt. Just wanting to quit so many times because like I just couldn't get it. And I struggled and I struggled and I struggled and I struggled and I struggled, and so many nights. And I've been doing it now for 20 years now, or just over 20 years I've been trading the markets now for, and so many times where I'm getting involved with that journey because I wasn't academically smart. Yeah, it was so hard, and there's a lot of things that I ended up having to do, and I had to end up walking away with a lot of people, walking away from all my friends, not listening to my mother and father-in-law, my parents, you know, and yeah, there's a lot of sacrifice that actually went involved with that. You know, I really became a loner. Well, I just couldn't deal with people at the time, and because I really wanted to do it, you know, and because I didn't really understand the process, right? I didn't really understand, like, how do I get ahead, right? And initially, that's where day trading for me was, like, if I sit in front of the screen for 4 or 5 or 6 hours a night at that time, then I can do really well. And that was always hard. For you guys that are day trading right now, you know, that's actually hard, right? It's very, very, very difficult to do that. So, and how I found my success now is by looking at the markets half an hour, maybe an hour per day, looking for opportunities to get into it, hold it for a month or two, have a really big profit on that one trade instead of trying to look for all these small trades. And therefore I can have a high win-loss ratio. I can have small losses. And on top of all that, I now make so much more money now from my trading this way than I used to do sitting in front of the screen 8 hours per day. Yeah, and this is obviously how I got to where I am today, and this is the reason why I teach the way that I teach, because it was definitely a hard slug, hard jugger from there. And now I've personally found the right balance of how do I make a really good income this year from trading while still be able to have the freedom, right? Because that's always the hardest thing about trading, right? Is that if you day trade, then you got no freedom. Now, by having this combination of me getting into trades where I can swing trade, then therefore it's allowed that there. So anyway, guys, that's it for me today. I just want to give you guys there's a real big background about my story, about who I am personally. So if you've gone through so many things in life right now and your background, hopefully this can encourage you to, you know what, just keep going, but get help, get coaching and mentoring, but don't quit. There's gonna be so many times you want to quit, but if you don't quit, on the other side of that is some pretty amazing breakthroughs.